Growing up, I had a best friend named Lloyd. We grew up as regular old country boys, having all sorts of fun together. We collected baseball cards, played with our toy guns, went to the pool. We did just about everything together. When my dad took me out hunting for the first time, Lloyd came along then as well. Growing up, we really were inseparable. This happened when the two of us were in high school. Lloyd and I lived just off a rural route way out of town. This was a very poor area, and we both lived in pretty old, run-down houses. We had grown up in the 70s and early 80s. My family was fortunate enough to have a color television, but we didn't have anything like cable. That didn't matter too much to us kids though, because most of the stuff we did was outside. It was a really hot summer night when this happened. Lloyd was over at my house, which was usual. We were both 16 years old at the time. We had been in my room listening to music together pretty much all night long. After a while though, we began to get a little bit bored. Lloyd wanted to smoke a couple of joints that he had on him. He thought that we could get away with it in my room, but there was no way I was going to let him do that here. I couldn't take the chance of my dad smelling it. I didn't really know if he would have gotten in trouble for it or not, but it was not a chance I was willing to take. We lived right on the edge of a huge forest. It was a place we had explored in, hunted in, hung out in, and even smoked joints in before. I let Lloyd know that if he really wanted to smoke so badly, then we should probably go for a quick walk in the woods. It was already past midnight, but that was no big deal to us. We had often gone for walks really late at night before. My dad was still awake, watching television. We let him know that we were bored and going for a quick walk. He didn't really care all that much, just told us to be careful and take a flashlight with us. He also suggested I take my rifle out with me as well, which I decided to do just to make him happy. Since we lived in an extremely rural area, it wasn't unusual for a kid my age to have his own gun. We set out and began smoking as soon as we got out into the woods. It was extremely dark outside, so we had to use the flashlights right away. There were some paths to walk on, created by years of people simply walking through the forest. We just walked along those, deeper and deeper into the trees. For a while, the walk was just a normal walk. We didn't have anything happen or hear anything out of the ordinary. After a while, though, we noticed something lying off to the side of the path we were on. As we got a bit closer, we were pretty shocked by what we saw. There was a dead deer just lying on the ground. That in itself was not unusual, but it was cut up pretty bad. It was like some animal had killed and mauled it only in the area it was wounded in. What was especially weird was that many of the edible parts of the deer were left over as well. It seemed strange to both of us that any animal would have done this and left so much meat there. "Hey, what if we run into a bobcat or something that did this?" Lloyd asked me. I held up my rifle. "That's what we have this for." Don't misunderstand me, however. I wasn't going looking for something to kill. I would just absolutely use my rifle to protect myself from whatever was out there. We didn't think a whole lot more about it and kept walking through the woods and smoking. Now though, we were listening to the noises around us much more closely. We were talking about the possibility of a bobcat, and I guess the more we talked about it, the more we convinced ourselves one might be out there. We were not too scared though. I don't know how long we were out or when we decided to turn around and head back toward my house, but eventually we did so. It was pretty late into the night. We were pretty stoned at that point too, but no more than we were used to being. It was on the way back that Lloyd began to get a little bit paranoid. He kept on telling me he was hearing things out in the woods. I wasn't hearing any of the noises he described myself, and I told him he was just being paranoid because he was stoned. He was absolutely confident, though, that he was hearing something out there. He was confident something was walking the woods with us. He began getting really worried that another animal was out there, stalking us. I still couldn't hear the noises he'd been talking about, though. The more we walked along, the more paranoid he got. He kept asking me, whispering over and over, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" I hadn't heard any of the things he was talking about though. When we crossed back toward the area we'd originally seen that deer, we were surprised to see it was already no longer there. This just increased Lloyd's paranoia, and he began scanning the area, trying to see if an animal had dragged it off somewhere. "Holy shit," I heard his whisper as he grabbed my arm. Lloyd made me look over into the woods, but wouldn't shine his light in that direction. Although it was dark, I could see what looked like a large figure somewhere out in the woods. It was moving around too. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it over at whatever it was that we were looking at. We saw the deer, and whatever this big figure was obviously pulling it. It quickly darted out of the way before we could fully shine the light upon it. However, we had both seen this. For the first time, I was just as scared as Lloyd, or perhaps even more. I didn't know who or what we just saw, but after what we remembered from seeing the deer and what we had seen in the dark, I knew someone or something was out there. To let them know we were armed, I took my rifle and fired one shot into the air, hoping that would scare whatever it was away. "We need to get out of here," Lloyd told me. I agreed, and the two of us began jogging along the path to get out of the woods. We were scared of that thing that might have killed that deer. We wanted to get as far away from it as possible. We didn't know if it tried following us, but we got out of the woods as fast as we could. What we had seen was not very far from the house either. We both rushed in and locked the doors behind us. It was hot outside, and we usually kept the doors open. They were usually left unlocked too, so this was a very rare thing. The two of us went and hid out in my room and kept the gun with us, fully loaded. We didn't sleep at all that night. I guess that really shouldn't be surprising though. About a month later, this really huge guy was arrested in those woods, not far from our house. Apparently, he'd attacked a police officer who had stopped to question him. I have no doubt it was the very same person we saw that night. I always used to enjoy taking my dog on a walk through the woods every day. I lived out in the country by myself. For the most part, when I took my dog for a walk, I would take him through the same area every time. One day, however, I decided to travel out in a completely different direction, and that resulted in me seeing the strangest thing I had ever seen in my life. It was nothing more than a decision made out of boredom, but I took my dog alongside the dirt roads past the driveway, then out into the hills that were opposite my house. Like my normal walks, we were out there for quite a long time. We weren't hunting or anything, but my dog and I like to take really long walks in the country as if we were. I didn't even have to leash him, as he never went too far from me, and he always came back right away when I called. Beside being a little more dense than the forest we usually walked in, this was not too much of a different journey. We were having a good time walking through the woods and enjoying what we were seeing. My dog, Roscoe, had been running around looking at various things. He had beaten me over the top of the hill, and I was trying to get up there to check on him. Before I even made it to the top though, he came running back over the hill to me. When he caught up to me, he turned and tried to lead me up the hill all over again. "Did you find something interesting, boy?" I asked him. Roscoe turned and began running back over the hill. I stepped up my pace and made it over as well to see where he was going. Once I made it over, I noticed something that really surprised me. It looked like there was an old cabin on the other side of the hill. Since Roscoe was over right by this cabin, I figured that must be what he was barking about. I really didn't want to bother whoever was living out in the woods like that. I knew better than to get involved with those people. I tried calling Roscoe over and over, trying to get him to come back to me, but for some reason he would not do it. I was very nervous as I walked up to him. He wasn't barking or anything, so it was possible anyone living inside hadn't heard him yet. I tried my best to be as quiet as possible and tried to go up to Roscoe so I could grab him by the collar and lead him away. As I got up to him though, I looked over to the other side of the cabin that I hadn't seen before, and that's when I noticed something really strange. There was a tree that was really close by the side of the cabin. Hanging from this tree were all sorts of shoes. They were all different kinds and pairs, most of them in many different sizes. They all had their strings tied together, and then the strings were tied to different branches on the tree. Most of them looked like they'd been up there for a long time, heavily beaten by the weather. Some of the shoes on that tree, however, looked like they had been put there more recently and were not as weathered by the elements. All in all, it was the weirdest thing I had ever seen, and the most disturbing thing as well. I tried to be as quiet as I could as I led Roscoe away from the area. I thought if I led him down the hill, we could get back to the road and take that back home. As we kept on going downward, though, I smelled something pretty nasty. It got worse and worse until we got to the very bottom of the hill. At the bottom, I saw the most disgusting thing I had ever seen in my life. There was a pile of what appeared to be rotted and decaying roadkill or something of the like at the bottom of that hill. It was vile, and I had to do everything I could to keep from puking. I grabbed Roscoe by the collar and quickly led him away. We eventually got back to the dirt road. I used it and took my dog home with me. I don't know exactly what I saw that day. Between the weird shoe tree and that pile of decaying meat, it was the weirdest shit. But then again, a lot of times if you go hiking where you're not supposed to, you'll find the weirdest sights. I inherited my parents' home when they both passed away when I was in my early 20s. I was not in a relationship and didn't have any children either, so I moved in all alone. It was a pretty big house to live in alone, but I didn't want to get rid of it or sell it or anything like that. And because of that, I stayed there for a very long time by myself. I was a single female living in a big house in town all by my lonesome. My next-door neighbors, or at least the ones who owned the house at the time, did not live there. They rented the house out to several people throughout the time I had been living there. I'd had neighbors that I played with their children while growing up, and I also had people who lived there who we never even spoke a word to at all. When I owned the house, not much had changed. Well, about 2 years after I inherited it initially, the people who rented the house next door moved out, and it stayed empty for about a month or so. When someone new finally moved in, I came outside onto the porch to see who it was. I always liked to greet whoever moved in. Like my house, it was a big 3-bedroom family-sized home, so I expected a family to be moving in. When I went over to greet the man who I saw moving things in, I quickly realized he was moving in all by himself. He did not have anyone else moving in with him. And it wasn't surprising why. There was immediately something very off and very creepy about this guy. I noticed it right away. He wasn't talkative at all and kept looking at me in a way that made me feel very strange. When I excused myself and went back to my home, I just decided this was not going to be one of the more friendly neighborhood relationships I was going to have there. It didn't really bother me much though, because I figured that like most neighbors over the years, he wouldn't be here forever anyway. Things continued to be strange with him as the weeks passed by. He wouldn't really ever talk to me. If I came out of the house though, and he was on his porch, he would stare at me the entire time I was outside. His eyes would always follow me to my car and watch me whenever I drove away. I guess I should have worried about him breaking into my house and stealing my stuff or something, but I never did. I could always tell from his eyes that that sort of thing was not important to him. He seemed like he was interested in me for some reason. After some time of things keeping up like that, I came to the conclusion that he was harmless enough. Not so long after that, though, I had seen him watching me from one of the windows of his house whenever he could catch a glimpse of me. That was much creepier than him just watching me from his porch, but I tried not to think about it too much. One night, about 7 months after he moved in, I'd gotten home pretty late from work. I just wanted to have a couple of glasses of wine and take a quick bath. I was doing a good job at finally relaxing after a very stressful work day. My bathroom was on the second floor of the house. After I was done with my bath, I dried off and put on my robe. I decided to go down to the second floor and grab myself another glass of wine. I was walking around in the dark like I tend to do. I have somewhat good night vision. I got the bottle out of the refrigerator and poured a glass, keeping the door open. Then I placed the bottle back inside. When this refrigerator door was open, it faced the back of my house and blocked my back door. I closed it, and the kitchen went dark again when the light inside went out. After the couple of seconds it took for my eyes to adjust, I saw something out the back window. It was only for a few moments, but I was sure of it. There was a man who was looking in the back window of my house, and there was no doubt at all it must be my next-door neighbor. Within a moment of me catching sight of him, he was already gone. Now, I didn't scream or panic or anything, but I did grab my phone and call the police. I let them know exactly what I had seen. I didn't have any proof that the man was at my back door, but in a moment of irony, I really didn't need it actually. The scariest revelation of my life also ended up being the very thing that helped me. The police revealed to me that my neighbor was a convicted sex offender. The reason they didn't need proof that he was at my door to arrest him was because he'd actually failed to register long before he moved in. He went to jail and was evicted as my neighbor. I was scared to death when I was told this by police. It made me think of the possibilities with a person like that living next door. It's a good thing they caught him when they did. This story happened when I was about 13 or 14. I grew up in a town with a lot of walking/biking trails in a forest area about a 10-minute walk away from my house. I spent a lot of time outside because of this. One of my best friends, we'll call him Anthony, lived in the neighborhood just across from mine. I would walk frequently to his house, knock on his door, and see whether he wanted to join me in biking aimlessly around town. On this particular day, he decided to join me, and we went down to the local lake, an extremely popular spot during the summer. It's basically never empty. There's a trail right next to the local library, which leads down to the lake. We decided to hang out by the trail entrance, as it was right next to a tunnel that ran under the street above, providing some pretty good shade and amplification for listening to music together off our iPods. This tunnel was probably a good 20 feet long or so, with the only easy path back up to the street above being the paved one on one side. The trail itself was made of gravel, with heavy trees on both sides. No easy way to get off with a bike unless you use the designated entrances and exits. Anthony and I were hanging out on the opposite side of the tunnel from the trail entrance so as to not bother any families getting on the trail with our music. We had our bikes leaned up on the side of the tunnel when I noticed a man coming through on the opposite end, right next to the trail entrance. He entered the tunnel, and once he was about 15 feet away, he called out to us, "I'm a city name, police officer." It didn't take more than a 2-second glance to tell you he obviously was not. He was wearing cargo shorts, a green tank top, sandals, and a big military-style backpack. Even from about 15 feet away, I could tell his skin was really greasy and his hair was unkempt as well. I immediately knew something bad was about to happen, and my adrenaline started to rush. I turned to my friend and yelled at him to run, to which he hopped on his bike and began to ride off. The man was standing between us and the trail entrance, so there was no easy way for us to take off without either needing to go directly past him or down the trail in the opposite direction. Anthony chose to ride for the main entrance that the man was blocking. As he rode past, the man reached out and grabbed his arm. Anthony sort of stopped, but the man seemed to be more focused on me and ended up letting go, after which Anthony quickly took off. I knew I wouldn't be as lucky as he was though if I tried to push my way past the man. Immediately, I started looking for other ways to run. I noticed there was actually a small dirt trail on the same end of the tunnel we'd been on. I tried to take my bike up it, and the man yelled after me, "Didn't your parents ever teach you not to run from the fucking cops?" The trail was too small for me to carry my bike down, so I just dropped it on the ground and continued running on foot, hoping this side trail led back up to the street where he at least wouldn't be able to hurt me without any witnesses. He chased me about halfway down the trail, but eventually turned around. I ended up coming out at the library and quickly ran to the top of the tunnel so I could see what he was doing. All I saw was him riding off on my bike. I called the cops, and they came to my house to give me a lineup after I walked home. I instantly identified the guy. Apparently, he and his twin brother were homeless and on meth, which would explain his demeanor and motivation. They were known for stealing bikes in the area, but never so brazenly. I was just glad the situation wasn't worse, because based on his substance use, he could have easily chosen violence at the drop of a hat.